We'll just pick it up now. Chapter 2 of Blackberries Matter. Hillary's Blackberries may be the heart of the matter by George Webb. Chapter 2. If a 40-year Biden campaign staffer confesses, shouldn't we at least look into it? In April of 2017, after knocking on doors in 20 different cities in Canada and the United States investigating the Hillary DNC email scandal, I had found what was most likely a stash of encrypted Blackberries and the hard drives from the DNC used for various nefarious purposes by the DNC. A key congressional aide of DNC chairwoman, a Pakistani named Imran Awan, making $160,000 a year, working 9 months a year in Pakistan, had stashed the Blackberries and hard drives from the DNC at one of his 20 houses in Washington, D.C., in the Washington, D.C. area. I had found a fact witness who lived at the house that said the FBI, Naval Intelligence, and Fairfax County Sheriff had all been to the house to file reports on the encrypted Blackberry stash. I reproduced the montage of Imran Awan's re-enter Andre Taggart many times in this 3-year investigation, beginning when I first published Finding the DNC Blackberries in April 2017. Very soon after this, I got a call from a 40-year staffer from Joe Biden's office that could tell me all about how Imran Awan got to Capitol Hill, who he configured the encrypted Blackberries for, and what the encrypted Blackberries were used for. After a marathon wine-soaked meeting, Mr. Biden Blackberry told me Imran Awan had come through a CIA front company called Inter-American. He configured encrypted Blackberries for DNC heavyweights like Rahm Emanuel and Anthony Weiner when they were in Congress, and these encrypted Blackberries had these encrypted Blackberries hobbled over. Must be some kind of a typo. To be used for covert operations like Libya, Syria, and the Iran nuclear deal. Mr. Biden Blackberry informed me Imran Awan came into the U.S. Congress through a CIA cutout called Inter-American. He joked with the names, saying Enter America was the foundation's nickname. IDB, Inter-American Development Bank. The Inter-American Foundation is controlled by David Rockefeller, who in turn controls Inter-American Foundation. Apparently, encrypted Blackberries, originally configured for fighting terrorism with our NATO allies, had been downgraded into communications devices with the Muslim Brotherhood for arms trading and drug running. I remember my image of Seth Rich as a DNC whistleblower being shattered that evening. He was far more adept at prospecting for oil and gas in the heartland of America with a company called Pioneer Energy Solutions. Secret crooked pipelines were apparently his stock in trade for Hank Greenberg of AIG and Warren Buffett's oil trains to China. Resources for the future. I guess another company. The illegal proceeds were moved through a company called Resources for the Future, which funded more exploration of oil and gas with the help of satellites. My key takeaway was the DNC concocted the Seth Rich story to drip blood all over the Hillary DNC emails to make them more salacious and tempting for the Trump campaign. Bottom line, the Awan Blackberries were being used for nefarious purposes, for a kickback scheme to the U.S. Congress for funding long-term wars, with the arms being diverted to other countries for oil, gas, and mineral plays. Ambassador William Taylor may have been the mastermind of the Trump impeachment and may have used the same Libya Blackberries. Top diplomat Bill Taylor says Ukraine aid linked to Trump demands of Biden 2016 probes. You got that? To this day, I believe I either spoke with Ambassador William Taylor of Trump impeachment fame or a close relative with darker hair but the same features. Remember, I made about 4,000 videos for 3 years after this meeting trying to publicize this Biden staffer's confession after the meeting, so please don't accuse me of sitting on this information. I really felt this was a case closed situation to get a conviction in the Hillary Clinton, Hubba Abedin, illegal encrypted BlackBerry, illegal Gmail account case. Law enforcement had the BlackBerries and the DNC hard drives. I had fact witnesses named Andre Taggart, an ex-Marine, and a Navy cryptologist named Tanya Taggart. Tanaye Taggart. And we had a 40-year confidant of Joe Biden saying the BlackBerries bled out of the Senate to be used as a covert action spy communications tool. The Biden Senate BlackBerry that was left with me in May of 2017 is shown here. The black barcode has been unpixelated from another video. The filmmaker who took the film has refused to unpixel the BlackBerry. Biden's DIA man knows Imran Awan, ? Matthew Gonter configured the Biden BlackBerries. He was a DIA, human intelligence specialist, with a master's degree in encrypted communications management from Georgetown. DIA, I'm pretty sure that's Department of Information Intelligence Assessment. To add to the pile of incriminating information, Mr. Biden BlackBerry had accidentally left his HIS Senate BlackBerry with me. I ran the phone number back to a DIA human intelligence officer named Matthew Gonter, assigned to Capitol Hill with his Georgetown degree in encrypted device management. These phones turned out to be configured for the Secure Communications Center of the state for communicating directly with INSCOM, the United States Armed Forces Intelligence Command. The secure Senate BlackBerries had indeed bled over from Biden's staff talking about Ukraine to Hillary's folks in the Senate using encrypted communications to plan Libya, Syria, and the Iran nuclear deal. The case seemed like one of those 5-minute court cases where you go directly to sentencing after the defense concedes they are caught red-handed. 1 minute to midnight. Another book, pretty much same deal. Chapter 3, The NATO Connection. Hillary Clinton's long collaboration with Carl Bildt of NATO had led to the most horrific ethnic cleansing in the 1990s in Bosnia, Serbia, and Kosovo. Nothing changed in Libya and Syria when she became Secretary of State. Since 12th June 2020, Ukraine is one of 6 countries known as Enhanced Opportunity Partners under the Partnership Interoperability Initiative that make particularly significant contributions to NATO operations and other alliance objectives. As such, the country has enhanced opportunities for dialogue and cooperation with allies. Mr. Biden BlackBerry had given me the impression the Hillary and Joe Biden BlackBerries were all about NATO and diverting money the U.S. Congress sent for fighting terrorism to wars far away from the war theaters of Iraq and Afghanistan. The subject of Ukraine came up over and over again as an intermediary for moving these weapons around the world. In my video series, I had already done hundreds of videos on Clinton Foundation President Eric Braverman, but I did not know the name of the Ukrainian warlord he dealt with at the time. I later found out that Igor Kolomoisky was the key diverter of the NATO money, which surprised me since Ukraine is only a NATO partner country, not a NATO member country. Ukraine is one of 6 enhanced opportunity partners for NATO, currying special status for diplomatic missions and covert weapons programs. I believe this partnership included a specialized access program for biological weapons, judging by the 4 NATO partner depots. Mr. Kolomoisky. I believed at the time that Mr. Biden Blackberry interviewed the key CIA proxy armies was called Pravi Sector. But later, I was informed Kolomoisky's armies were called the Azov Brigade and the Dnieper Brigade. I had been told a sunflower seed oil billionaire in Ukraine was hiding Eric Braverman in Tel Aviv and on a nearby kibbutz where Mark Zuckerberg's brother was a rabbi. Apparently, Igor Kolomoisky does indeed own a sunflower seed oil company, and this front company moves chemical weapons and possible biological weapons near the Russian border. Kolomoisky's Stormtrooper Dnieper Brigade logo. I have never been to Ukraine, but the rumor is Kolomoisky would have a personally signed bottle of sunflower seed oil from his safe in Geneva to seal the deal for brokering NATO chemicals or biological weapons. The other source have told me Kolomoisky does this for any NATO weapons deal, conventional for unconventional, conventional. Damn. Other sources have told me Kolomoisky does this for any NATO weapons deal, conventional or unconventional. Regardless, it is obvious Kolomoisky has extremely strong allies in the U.S. Congress, including Debbie Merkel-Powell. Kolomoisky's close relationship to Congresswoman Merkel-Powell from Florida became a campaign issue in her most recent election. She seemed just another round of congressional representatives asked with carrying the Kolomoisky Blackberry to facilitate kickbacks to the U.S. Congress. In 2020, I would learn Kolomoisky's may have sent his skinhead armies to Hong Kong to spray protesters with a biological agent. Was China spraying all its protesters and prisoners with coronavirus in a partnership with Kolomoisky and NATO? What the hell are Ukrainian fascists doing in Hong Kong protest? An article. Bottom line, I thought these Ukrainian proxy armies were just being employed as conventional mercenaries at the time of meeting Mr. Biden Blackberry, and I would later find these proxy armies of Kolomoisky could spray biological and chemical ways in a variety of ways. I did learn that Jeff Epstein was closely associated with the use of Ukrainian chemical and biological weapons with a Ukrainian warlord. As before, I didn't know when I was meeting Mr. Biden Blackberry. That was... Oh, man. I didn't know I was meeting Mr. Biden Blackberry, that this was Kolomoisky. I had already done hundreds of videos at this time on Jeff Epstein, performing this role for two dark weapons sister companies, DynCorp and Dynport. Company to die for is DynCorp. DynCorp Ratlines. Epstein's group of pilots flew missions for longtime CIA contractor DynCorp and the DynCorp joint venture with Portendowns, UK's bioweapons manufacturer called Dynport. Chapter 4. How long were the encrypted Hillary Blackberries used for illegal covert actions? Hillary's Blackberries may have been used for uranium-1 scandal, megatons to megawatts, and secret NATO biological and chemical weapons programs. Now, megatons to megawatts was a type of program used to disassemble old Soviet nuclear warheads and reconfigure them into making power. Hence megatons to megawatts. But that one didn't really go down. It sounded good in theory, but didn't happen. We know NATO configured State Department encrypted Blackberries for General Michael Flynn to communicate with Russian Ambassador Kislyak in negotiating a 30 nuclear reactor deal with Saudi Arabia and 5 other Sunni Arab kingdoms. We know Flynn's lawyer Sidney Powell also spoke of a pair of encrypted Blackberries given to Mike Flynn and Joseph Mifsud of Steele dossier fame. That was the guy that did the Steele dossier was the Pissgate. Yeah, Trump came into a hotel, had a bunch of hookers piss on a bed because Obama and his wife apparently slept there. Right. We also know Flynn texted the CEO of the nuclear fuel rod company, Alex Copson, on an encrypted BlackBerry at Trump's inauguration. We can surmise from this evidence that Flynn was given the encrypted BlackBerry for the IP3 nuclear deal and may have been entrapped by giving him a BlackBerry already involved in nefarious activity. We know the Awans used the 123@mail.house.gov Dropbox in the U.S. Congress for information going to sensitive House committee, and we know that the 123 agreements are nuclear agreements, like the 123 nuclear agreement negotiated with Russia in 2010. Was Flynn given a Hillary State Department encrypted BlackBerry already involved in communication with Russians in order to entrap him? Uranium-1 executives missing. Executive charged with bribing Russia in Uranium-1. We are not speculating there was a State Department deal with the Russians with a scandal known as Uranium-1, and we know Hillary Clinton was the key driver to getting this deal to sell 20% of the known U.S. supply of uranium to the Russians in 2010. The key question is, were Hillary's Blackberries used in negotiating Uranium-1? We also know that a chemical biological weapons delivery system was negotiated between the State Department and the Russian state-owned military technology conglomerate named Rosborn export in 2012. We know the Russians played a key role in getting the Iran nuclear deal by supplementing American uranium and weapons technology. So, again, this suggests Hillary's encrypted Blackberries would be used here again for diplomatic secrecy. Maybe we were deconstructing our own warheads, but I thought it was the Soviet Union, so I could be wrong. George Webb visited the Russian ambassador Kislyak's residence the night of a possible compromise party in April of 2017. Mark's yellow cake going to Bandabar Abbas. Thank you, United States farmers and ranchers for the U1. Not sure what that means. George Webb went to Frederick, Maryland to interview the transport logistics key executives Mark Lambert and his wife, both Farsi speaking in addition to Russian for Lambert's wife. Webb interviewed the pair involved in the Russian uranium bribery scandal before they were indicted. Webb's research partner Jenny Moore interviewed both of Lambert's daughters, who also were Farsi speaking, and both Iranian son-in-laws were Iranian natives. For a very small trucking company in Frederick, Maryland, Transport Logistics had at least 6 Farsi speakers, which might indicate frequent business with Iran. Chapter 5. Whose virus is it anyways? Is NATO responsible for COVID-19 worldwide outbreaks? I would think so. In 1969, Richard Nixon directed the CIA to end bioweapons development at Fort Detrick, also the National Cancer Institute. A bioweapons development laboratory complex started at the end of World War II to counter the prospect Hitler might use the bioweapon anthrax in a last-ditch attack against London. Richard Helms, Nixon's CIA director, didn't shut down the bioweapons program. He just moved it to Canada, Montreal to be specific. Journalist George Webb visits Montreal, where CIA moved its bioweapons program in 1969 to Sidney Gottlieb's lab at McGill University. Gottlieb is the subject of a recent Stephen Kinzer book, Poisoner in Chief. Fantastic book. The reader will also note that development of bioweapons at Fort Detrick in Maryland had never really stopped. Just the funding mechanism changed from bioweapons being funded by the Department of Defense to NATO through our Canadian NATO partner. Sneaky, sneaky. We will trace the escape of the coronavirus deployed in the August of 2019 in Wuhan directly to the same Fort Detrick laboratory. For now, a Harvard study has tracked the outbreak of COVID-19 to August of 2019. Analysis of hospital traffic and search engine data in Wuhan, China indicates early disease activity in the fall of 2019. And URL link. A Harvard Medical School study suggests COVID-19 was infecting people in Wuhan as early as August of 2019. In any event, doctors in that cut off. A Harvard study has tracked COVID-19 outbreaks to Wuhan in August of 2019. In this chapter, we will show you that in August 2019, Fort Detrick had a security leak event so severe The leak shut down Fort Detrick for the first time in its existence, and we will now show how the guy who left the door open at Fort Detrick, Sina Bavari, also had 4 startup companies focused on the bat viruses developed between Fort Detrick and Wuhan Virology Institute. Here's our sneaky little man right here. Sneaky, sneaky. Innovation Campus welcomes new partner to biotech. A diversity hire, no doubt. Sina Bavari, the director of the Fort Detrick Bioweapons Program, left the door open at the world's most pathogenic lab, causing a shutdown for the first time in its history. He quickly went to work marketing the coronavirus genome to major pharmaceuticals like GlaxoSmithKline and Gilead. And NATO is at Fort Detrick. Every step of the way in the development of the bioweapons. The NATO go-between is named Jens Kuhn, and Bavari and Kuhn have an outside joint venture together called Bavari Nordic. Why does a U.S. and NATO weapons scientist have private companies while being paid by the Department of Defense and NATO? Valid questions. Principal Tunnel Government Services, Virology, Lead NIH, NIAID, DCR, Integrated Tech Research Facilities at Fort Detrick. This is Jens Kuhn. Jens Kuhn is a NATO scientist working under diplomatic immunity. Isn't that neat? At Fort Detrick, by his own admission, NATO's Winnipeg Bioweapons Lab is the key intermediary to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Jens Kuhn is also a key figure in the stockpiling of the old Soviet Union bioweapons program called Vektor. Vektor. These bioweapons are stored in former Soviet Union bloc satellite countries ostensibly to thwart a Russian invasion. Inside the biological weapons facility at Stepanogorsk, Kazakhstan, where the Soviet Union was prepared to make tons of anthrax if the orders came from Moscow, via National Security Archive. I guess this was their setup. Anthrax is by far the most survivable organism used in bioweapons for the extreme conditions of being used with explosives. Here are the old Soviet fermenters used in Kazakhstan, now under the control of Clinton acolyte President Nazarbayev. Nazarbayev is the 3-decade dictator best known for his uranium dealings with Hillary Clinton outlined in Clinton Cash. In future chapters, we will discuss how NATO couriers are responsible for the movement of these bioweapons. We will demonstrate the chain of command at NATO for bioweapons. We will show the people who configured the NATO encrypted Blackberries to control the movement of these bioweapons, and we will show the presence of NATO couriers at the 2019 NATO Wuhan military games. Inside a 20,000-liter fermenter at a plant in Kazakhstan, photo via Center Cooperative Threat Reduction. Kind of sounds like the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Another story for another time. Chapter 6, Clinton Blackberry and weapons purchases from old Soviet Union. Weapons purchased from Russians by Muslim Brotherhood for Libya and Syria used same encrypted Blackberries as Russia and Iranian nuclear and biological weapons deal. Having a working theory in investigative reporting is just as important as a detective having a working theory of how the evidence fits together. I was sitting with D.C. reporter Lee Stranahan in his office, a block from the White House, and he just told me straight and he just told me straight out in 2018, APCO ties everything together. APCO is the key matter of faculty. Ooh, APCO is the key, said matter-of-factly. Lee Stranahan had worked extensively with Steve Bannon at Breitbart, a conservative alt-right outlet on Capitol Hill. He quit Breitbart because Breitbart wouldn't let Lee Stranahan ask any more Ukraine questions at White House briefings. It turned out Stranahan was years ahead on the Ukraine Gate story that broke in D.C. the following year. Stranahan has scooped all the White House briefings reporters with a key contact inside the Ukrainian embassy feeding him information. That was a great documentary. Still kind of a whitewash, but everybody should check it out. DC reporter Lee Stranahan was a key source for Oliver Stone's movie, Revealing Ukraine. I applied what I knew about the Hillary Blackberries I had found at Imran Awan's house and what I was told about Mr. Biden Blackberry, about how the Blackberries were used for Libya, Syria, et al. Invasions, and for energy deals like the Iran nuclear deal. Mr. Biden Blackberry had told me the encrypted State Department Blackberries had started out to conduct Russian energy deals like a little-known buyout program for Russian missiles called megatons to megawatts. I was right. But Hillary Clinton had repurposed these special access programs, a secure encrypted private network, to covert actions like Libya. And everything Stranahan mapped perfectly with a pattern of Biden energy deals transitioning to Hillary covert actions with the encrypted Blackberries. Special access programs, top secret. And let's not forget the unacknowledged special access programs. Another story for another day. And Stranahan had all the pieces to the puzzle with APCO and little-known diplomat Jonathan Weiner. Stranahan had traced the early Biden-Russia energy plays to APCO, and he later identified Weiner played Weiner. Did he? I think that might be a Weiner. It's Weiner. And he later identified Weiner played the key role as the special envoy to Libya. Hillary's encrypted Blackberries seemed to be mopping up these nascent nuclear programs of Libya and Syria, moving them straight to Ukraine to be bundled for the Iran nuclear deal. Nascent just means new and untested. Big fancy words. Jonathan Weiner, with his encrypted Blackberries for State Department luminaries like Clinton and Kerry, was there every step of the way. Tripoli, Tehran, treason, Trump, same Blackberry. Jonathan Weiner, former U.S. Special Envoy for Libya, former international law enforcement at the United States. Jonathan Weiner of APCO, Biden's energy deal firewall, and Hillary Clinton's weapons deals firewall, and a man, whatever Hillary Clinton's emails Blackberries seem to be. Mr. Weiner. I was later told APCO was an anagram for capo, C-A-P-O, meaning the top-ranking officer in the Sicilian crime syndicate. Oh, capo, yeah. This DNC mafia rumor came from a Capitol Hill staffer with an explanation and an org chart in a swanky Capitol Hill restaurant. Rahm Emanuel and John Podesta had supposedly inherited the U.S. leg of Mossad Sicilian mob crime syndicate of Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano. Jew. From a Navy intelligence joint venture called Operation Underworld. The deal allowed Mossad to ship to U.S. ports and the Teamsters, now SEIU, to have exclusive trucking contracts. Although I was never able to run down this loose talk in a DC restaurant known for insider talk, noting, "Nothing the staffer told me didn't fit the facts." Project Underworld, the World War II alliance between the Navy and the mob. And who was the supposed capo of APCO? None other than Mark Rich, the infamous Mossad energy and weapons broker of South Africa. Rich had brokered illegal sanctioned oil from Iran through a secret pipeline through Israel to the Mediterranean. Rich had brokered illegal nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons to sanctioned South Africa as well. Secret Lives of Mark Rich, King. Rich was extremely close to the Clintons, as evidenced by the unbelievable pardon Mark Rich received from Bill Clinton in 2001. And Mark Rich was extremely close to Boris Yeltsin, the premier of Russia, who had brokered off all of the old Soviet Union's nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, but less known than the Mark Rich pardon was FBI Director James Comey's 7 different wrist slaps for Mark Rich, none of which resulted in any jail time. Mark Rich not only received a pardon from Bill Clinton after brokering off most of the old Soviet Union's nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons stockpile, he also received 7 wrist slaps from James Comey, but never any jail time. You guys should watch that movie called Lord of War, which this is kind of what it's about. Except they just focus on guns and stuff, not uranium and chemical, biological weapons. Mark Rich's dealings in stolen and sanctioned energy, in addition to brokering the weapons of mass destruction of the old Soviet Union, certainly mapped perfectly with Hillary's Blackberries, Huma Abedin, Doug Band, and Jeff Epstein's Teneo, the Hidden Hand. And of course, the handmaiden of Rahm Emanuel and John Podesta's APCO, Jonathan Weiner. Joe Biden and John Kerry, of course, were involved too in the Russian energy deals, according to my Mr. Biden Blackberry. And this story was independently confirmed by DC reporter Lee Stranahan. DC reporter Lee Stranahan broke Ukraine-gate in 2017, complete with Biden connections to a firm called APCO. We will see in future chapters how Hillary Clinton's Blackberries seem to be everywhere Mark Rich's energy or illegal weapons deals are going down, especially with respect to nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. In the next chapter, we will discuss the nuclear disarmament of the Soviet Union and a deal for 20,000 nuclear warheads called megatons to megawatts. 20,000 nukes, one ghost, megaton mystery man. We will also look into the follow-on deal with Russia to provide yellow cake uranium for U.S. mines to close the Iran nuclear deal called Uranium One. Yes, Mark Rich and Hillary Clinton's encrypted Blackberries are going to be the center of each one. Chapter 7, Megatons to Megabucks. Hillary Clinton's Blackberries seem to really be Mark Rich's Blackberries for dark energy and weapons deals. We all remember Les Wexner and Jeff Epstein, don't we? We should. At the end of 45 years of Cold War, the old Soviet Union had only its mighty nuclear arsenal to show for its decades of struggle and toil with the West. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it only had its military technology and the fruits of that military technology and infrastructure to sell off so its people could eat. The Soviet bloc satellite countries like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Ukraine were in a similar situation. In 1989 and 1990, I had a chance to witness this sell-off of armaments and auto factories firsthand in Czechoslovakia and Hungary with the chief of staff of President Havel, sold to Mark Rich. Enter Mark Rich. Mark Rich, the Mossad superweapons broker, had ensured Boris Yeltsin would be the West's choice after the fall of its big sell-off. And after everything was for sale, I was offered an oil tanker for $60,000 in Prague. All the meetings started out talking about factories for cars and trucks and ended talking about retooling for machine guns. And during the fall, Henry Kissinger seemed to be everywhere in these discussions. Typical. Mark Rich divided up Soviet weapons stockpiles with Yeltsin's generals during Yeltsin's tank speech. Yeltsin supposedly rehearsed the speech numerous times in the basement of the White Palace. I interviewed a member of the U.S. contingent in the Moscow Hilton. Watching the White Palace being shelled, Yeltsin was actually on the phone with Mark Rich most of the time building was being shelled. Calling from the basement, according to my source, most of Yeltsin's generals were actually with Mark Rich at the Hilton, talking about sellable assets of the collapsing Soviet Union's weapons stockpiles. I can read sellable. There's just typos in here because he pumps these things out as fast as the news comes out. Give the man a break. The biggest prize of the Soviet... Where was I? Yeah. The biggest prize of the Soviet Union collapse, more than 40,000 nuclear missiles with nuclear warheads, because nuclear warheads can be used as gigantic plowshares to move incredible amounts of earth. Old nuclear weapons were incredibly valuable in oil and mining applications. 20,000 Russian warheads have been used to fuel 10% of America's electricity over the past 15 years. Megatons to megawatts or megatons to megabucks. Additionally, Soviet nuclear warheads were incredibly valuable for the production of energy and medical research. Because bomb-grade uranium is enriched to 95% level, the highly enriched uranium is equivalent to a World Trade Center filled with highly enriched... The highly enriched uranium is equivalent to a World Trade Center filled with high-energy lithium batteries at full charge. Small nuclear reactors could be used to power drilling and tunnel operations in remote, harsh conditions, and power compressors used to push oil and gas to market through pipelines. Steam generator, cask, electromagnetic pump, and this is how they were doing it. Mark Rich's only problem, and the Mossad's, was how to get the United States to let him buy missiles. Enter megatons to megawatts. Rich would have his friend Rahm Emanuel and John Podesta appeal to Americans' fears of the nuclear missiles falling into the hands of terrorists. So Mark Rich would instead sell them to terrorists. ISIS, Israeli Secret Intelligence Services. In the megatons to megawatts plan, Russia would sell 20,000 nuclear weapons to be downgraded to safe, low-enriched uranium at the 5% enrichment level. Mark Rich saw the immediate profits opportunity here. He only had to sell 5 stories of his World Trade Center stockpile of nuclear batteries, keeping the rest as profit. And Mark Rich had at least 6 immediate buyers for the Russian nuclear stockpile: Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Pakistan, and India, with a strategic reserve being kept in Israel. Mark Rich just had to make sure his close friend hired FBI cops to look the other way while all this sanctioned nuclear proliferation occurred. Mark Rich's dream for FBI cops to look the other way was realized by U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein, establishing an FBI counterintelligence operation with Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok in the U.S. District of Maryland in Greenbelt, Maryland. Most of the U.S. missile HEU, or highly enriched uranium, intended for downblending reduction of enrichment from 95 to 5%, would never make it to the U.S. $2.2 million, a transparent success, megatons to megawatts. Mekarin, I don't know what the fuck. Ukraine would be the country where most of the highly enriched uranium would be stockpiled. Most missiles waiting for dismantling would be left in Kazakhstan until the uranium fuel rods were prepared in Russia and Ukraine. Uranium cylinder shipments to be downblended. Uranium cylinder shipments of downblended uranium from Russia to the United States would actually be completely spent, depleted uranium or uranium waste products. In future chapters, you will see how Rod Rosenstein, Peter Strzok, and Andrew McCabe planted disinformation with reporters to cover the true Mark Rich uranium diversion scheme. I worked with Fisk and Lambert at Eldau, Piketon Nuclear Plant. I might be Mark Rich, South African. Rob A. Rich holds the position of President, CEO, CFO, and Director at Blue Star Global Inc., and President of Rich Associates Inc. In the past, he occupied the position of Executive Vice President for Edlau International Company and Manager and Uranium Geologist at Yankee Atomic Electric Company. So you know what I'm talking about. Appendix. Memorable episodes from George Webb's YouTube channel. Great research, Professor Hamamoto and others on Teneo, Parnas, and Okan Wyansky. In the course of George Webb's 4-year investigation, our channel has gone to Imran Awan and his father's safe house in New York, Toronto, Montreal, Detroit, Virginia, and Florida, because so many of the Awan Blackberry carriers in Congress, 45 reps in Congress, carried Awan Blackberries, are from Florida, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz and several Trump properties and associates are there. We have ventured to Florida 4 times in our channel's reporting. On my Florida trips, I also conducted many interviews with authors who are experts on the CIA terrorism, including Daniel Hopsiger, Wayne Madsen, and Ed Haslam. Fort Belvoir frequently comes up in our story. Fort Belvoir hosts the Department of Defense Intelligence Command, INSCOM, and the Defense Threat Logistic Agency. the DLA. The Awan spy ring had a defense logistics agency trading number, and we have evidence Imran Awan worked part of his time in the U.S. Congress at the port of Karachi in Pakistan. Imran Awan's father and DNC heavyweight Rahm Emanuel owned a chemicals complex in Faisalabad together after defrauding 12 farmers for their land. Awan may have been involved in chemical and biological weapons testing on unsuspecting patients at the Fort Belfour Community Hospital from products made at this chemical complex. Several pieces of evidence came forward in our investigation that the Awan spy ring was just a continuation of the Amjad Awan heroin trade that Mark Rich was involved in with the BCCI Bank. I forgot what that stood for. George Webb is here on Capitol Hill in front of the number of sneakers of young people killed by overdoses each month. We followed the leads of Amjad Awan and the BCCI drug trade, which followed directly into the Awan spy ring in 2004 through 2016. This time substituting the HSBC or Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation private bank in Geneva, Switzerland. El Chapo also, I think it was El Chapo, but the Mexican cartel had their own window at the HSBC because they had so much business to give. The Webb report summarizes 4 years of George Webb investigative reporting into 6 episodes. This video series can be found on the video platform Brighteon under George Webb. Here, George Webb is reporting the 35-year no-bid contract with the United Arab Emirates for the port of Canaveral with a Russian missile general and an Iraqi nuclear expert. George Webb made numerous visits to Port Canaveral to talk with locals who protested the no-bid contracts going to a foreign firm with terrorists and weapons of mass destruction ties. And we're done.